Hello, everybody. I hope that you're doing well. We are moving right along and getting into the third week of the term. So I want to go ahead and share some slides and talk about some of the things going on this week. So for week number 3, we'll be taking some time to talk about the first research proposal. That's an assignment that's due in week 4, so 2 weeks from today on April 30th. But I want to make sure you've had some good time to prepare, to think about this assignment and know what to expect. We'll also discuss the 2 new types of textual methods that we'll be exploring this week, which are ideological and psychoanalytic criticism. So the textual methods proposal is due not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. You'll also notice that week you do not have a Canvas discussion that's due. This week's Canvas discussion is designed to help you to prepare for this assignment. It'll give you the chance to think through some of the methods that are especially interesting to you, perhaps some possible artifacts or pieces of communication that you can analyze for this assignment, and so forth. What I'll be asking you to do for this first proposal in the course is to pick one of the forms of textual analysis that we've discussed so far, and we'll be discussing next week. So we discussed semiotic and rhetorical last week, ideological and psychoanalytic instead of semiotic, and discourse analysis will be next week. Select an artifact, which is a stable piece of communication or text that's used for this study. And your proposal should be about 1,250 words, double space, standard font and margins. The things that I'm looking for you to include are an introduction that establishes the topic in question, a review of relevant literature, and a proposed research design. I want to talk about those in a little bit more detail. First of all, the introduction should establish answers to these questions. What's the topic or issue in communication that you're choosing to study? For example, maybe you're interested in studying a presidential address like a State of the Union. So what's the artifact here, right? So perhaps you're looking at the 2021 State of the Union address. What's the method that you're using to explore this topic? So for example, you might use a rhetorical style of textual analysis in order to examine this particular speech. And then consider what is the research question that you're giving here. So in other words, what is the key idea that you want to have answered over the course of doing research? For example, how might the 2021 State of the Union address invoke ethos as a way of establishing credibility to the US public audience? That would be a way of framing the overall project and what it is that you hope to discover through the process of developing this research. Secondarily, you should include a review of relevant literature. A literature review is an opportunity for you to examine how similar topics have been studied in the past, right? So how has previous literature discussed or addressed this issue? What are some of the concerns that are brought up through previous literature? What's missing and how might your study attempt to address it, right? So the literature review is a chance for you to look at other articles that have discussed similar issues or topics that might connect to your topic. For example, perhaps you're conducting a literature review about the use of presidential speeches or addresses and how those attempt to use the public, or perhaps you're examining how ethos has been studied and used in relevant communication work too. Think about this as giving you the resources and context from which you could conduct the study. And then the research design is the last part that I'm asking you to do. How would you address this research question? How would you go about studying this? What are you choosing to study and why, right? So this process is an opportunity for you to share and map out what it is that you would do. Since this is just a proposal, you don't actually have to do the research itself yet, right? You don't have to go in and actually analyze the speech. But what you're suggesting is the ways in which you might do so and how you can prepare yourself to do so should you end up going down this as one of the projects to actually do in the class. So with that in mind, and knowing that that's coming up, I want to talk about another option available to you as a method in textual analysis, which is ideological criticism. This is a common and widely used area in fields such as cultural studies. And what you're essentially doing in ideological criticism is evaluating the texts or pieces of communication in terms of political and socioeconomic issues that might be of consuming interest to a particular group. In other words, ideology is about power, right? It's about being able to unpack, understand, and critique power in terms of how individuals are expressed and who gets to express particular views or perspectives as well. There's a really good analysis by the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek of the 1980s film They Live. So the premise of They Live is that there is a pair of glasses that our main character pictured here is able to perceive, right? The idea is that when he puts on the pair of glasses, what looks like standard advertisements, images, newspaper headlines, instead are reflected to show what they're really about. So for example, there might be an ad for food, right? And the white background black text says consume. There is something that says, that's advertising perhaps a piece of clothing, and what it's really meaning is conform or buy. That's what ideological criticism is about, right? It's about putting on a pair of glasses and analyzing, okay, what does this piece of media, this advertisement, this speech, this song, this address, what does it really say? What are the views, the values, the beliefs, the goals, whether they're political or social in nature, that is really trying to be pushed as a result of this form of media? So there are a variety of different perspectives, scholars, and thought that have gone in and informed ideological criticism. Pictured here on the right is John Berger, who created the television series Ways of Seeing, in which he discusses the ways in which the use of perspective, that is in film and media, is centering how we view and interpret media. For example, one way this has been critiqued has been the idea of the male gaze. The ways in which the filming, the camera angles, the structure, particularly as it portrays women, as it portrays romance or sex, is oftentimes done in a way that is meant to appeal to a heterosexual male demographic, right? That it is designed, filmed, and structured in a way with that in mind. So that's one way of understanding ideological criticism. How is the structure of a film being used in a way that invokes or reinforces particular notions of power? Ideological criticism also draws itself from perspectives from Marx, right? The idea here of media and forms of communication dominated by the bourgeois ruling class to generate what is known as false consciousness of the masses or proletariat, right? This is an area, of course, where there is criticism, discussion. I encourage it. So, you're welcome to, if you find this to be a compelling method or way of doing ideological criticism, to pursue it. You push back to continue to think about what's guiding that and what it is that you're interested in doing as ideological criticism and where you might draw that. We also have the return of Barth, who talks about popular culture and mythologies that shape our understanding, again, the use of signs, symbols, and how those are represented by culture. The idea of hegemony, that the role of power and control is something that oftentimes is so pervasive and strong that in many ways we don't even recognize that it's ingrained as a part of our lives. As mentioned, Berger, Ways of Seeing, the ways in which advertisements, art, and film are depicted, who gets to see this, in what way is something being represented and visible. Judith Butler is a prominent queer and feminist theorist who discusses the role of gendered representation, in what ways are gender identities, perspectives being represented, depicted. Particularly Butler's notion of performance, that gender is a constant doing, right? A way that we visually represent ourselves, express ourselves, and use forms such as media as a way of doing gender. You have ever watched the TV show Friends, right? The character Rachel, her haircut, her style became extremely popular, and people would say if they were getting a particular haircut, it was the Rachel, right? Dealing with the idea that a sort of gendered performance of something like hair is something that's deeply ingrained with the culture too. We also have Will Davisky, who suggests that different types of political orientations, such as fatalist, individualist, elitist, and egalitarian, are shaping our understanding of events too. Right? What these authors are sharing in common in terms of perspectives and ideas is ways of taking apart the central assumptions, beliefs, and motivations that are guiding particular media. So if you think about ideological criticism, this is a way of using textual analysis to pick apart the core ideas and perspectives that said media is attempting to convey. Secondarily, we have what's known as psychoanalytic criticism. This is the other area we'll be exploring for this week. So psychoanalysis, if you're familiar in areas such as psychology, is drawn from Sigmund Freud, of course, a controversial figure whose perspectives on desire, on sexuality, have been heavily critiqued, particularly the kind of sexist nature of things such as the Oedipus complex or penis envy, right, have been heavily critiqued and pushed back upon for the ways in which they suggest gendered assumptions and roles. Carl Jung is another person in psychoanalysis who has generally fared better from history. Jung is in many ways, much more concerned with the human mind, with collective unconscious, with the ways that we develop myths, with the ways that we perform and express ourselves and identity, such as the idea of a persona or a public image that we share with other people. And in other words, psychoanalysis is about understanding how the human mind is impacting its relationship to a text. So again, Freud is drawing from psychoanalysis and unconscious factors that shape human behavior, like unconscious desire, whereas Jung is much more concerned with collective unconscious, the idea that mythology, meaning-making, things, drawing from other scholars like Joseph Campbell and The Hero's Journey are ingrained in culture and can be used to understand a text a bit better. One idea from Freud that has stuck around a lot better is the idea of the id, the ego, and superego. You might be familiar with these concepts, right? The id is referring to the kind of basic human desires. For example, I need to eat something right now, right? It's that core animalistic lizard brain that you feel. On the other end, you have the superego, which is this kind of much higher up authoritative force that says you're in the middle of a meeting, so you can't eat. Right? And the ego is generally portrayed as this judge that finds itself in the middle, where it's having to negotiate the id over here from the superego over here. So that can be a way that we can understand a text is negotiating those elements as well. We can also understand the use of symbols, right? Going back to semiotics and how symbols convey reality. They might represent the subconscious and guide our thoughts. For example, there's discussion about the use of subliminal messages. There's also the ways in which messages can refer to a particular belief system just by invoking the message, such as giving a peace sign, right? And the idea of conveying peace as a social good. There's also Erik Erikson's discussion about various crises and challenges that people encounter at different stages of life. So Erikson argues that over the course of human development, we find ourselves shaped with crises and questions. For example, have I lived a good and meaningful life is a question that many might often ask at old age. So the idea here is that in our communication, we are expressing and conveying those challenges as it relates to society. And lastly, Jung is arguing that there's a variety of different archetypes, roles that shape the ways that we communicate. Again, the idea of something such as the hero, the villain, right? The ways in which popular kind of roles in media have been utilized are, again, linking back to collective unconscious and our understanding of human experience. So psychoanalytic criticism is a good approach if you're really interested in trying to pick apart the ways of thinking and mentality that is guiding a particular text. What is the psychoanalytic state? What is going on in the person's head who is advocating this? And how can we use the text as a way of determining and realizing the ideal or the overall components, right? In a similar way that we might analyze the ideology or central beliefs that a particular author or text is bringing. So to wrap up our ideas for the day, I've asked you to start to think about some of the ways of doing textual methods, possible artifacts to look at for this week's activity. Again, ideological and psychoanalytic are a little bit more complicated in what they ask of somebody as a researcher and the types of questions that they're looking at. The best way I can boil that down for you is to say that ideological is very much concerned with the central assumptions, the beliefs, the role of power that's shaping a particular text. Whereas psychoanalytic criticism is using the text as a way of exploring the human mind and cognition. How is the human mind being represented in a particular text? And how can you use the text as a way of teasing out the ways of thinking that are being expressed? Next week, we only have one more form of textual analysis to get over, and that is the use of discourse analysis. So you'll be taking some time to look at that. You'll also be developing that first research proposal by the end of next week. I hope that you have a great week number 3. I will post another video next week, and I look forward to hearing from you and continuing to see your work in the discussion. Thank you.